Hey guys, it's John without the H here at Sin RC. Today I got my F-14 and I'm doing another setup video on it. I was inspired by the RC Geek's latest upload on the F-14 mentioning that he set his up as an Elevon configuration. To be honest with you, I keep forgetting that's even an option on models like this because quite literally the stabs are Elevons. Well, not literally, I mean they're differential stabilators if you really want to go that far. But for all practical purposes, they serve the same flight function that a Elevon equipped aircraft system would, like the Griffin down here. They're just full flying stabs instead of tabs on the end of the wing. So what I've done is I've gone a step further than him, and I've actually set mine up not only just with his, his setup on the full span flaps, which, you guys know me, I'm flying on 150% rates with crazy amounts of expo because, you've seen my throws. This isn't even as high as they go because I'm in gear-based. That's pretty high, right? On top of all this, I've also set up full span spoilers to emulate the missing spoiler panels that are only molded in on this jet. Check that out. This took some work to get this in here. But now this thing should slow down even faster with the downforce that the spoiler panels are now going to be creating on the wheels. I also swapped out the wheels for my FMS Viper / E-Flite Viper wheels from the tree crash to, put them through some use and save a decent amount of weight because the stock wheels are very heavy on this jet. So I've done some mods to this plane to really get it up to where I think it should be. So I'm going to do a quick overview of the wiring so you can kind of see what's set up in here. I've got my AR-10 360T receiver. I have bypassed the Freewing box. There's no blue box in here, but the box does control the LEDs, so I had to at least have the wing sweep plugged into here or the gear plugged in. The only two things plugged into this are the gear system and the wing sweeping. The rest of it is completely wired into the receiver. I try to keep it as clean as I could possibly keep it, especially because you want to make sure that you've got a clear path to the radio antennas. There's a remote receiver up front that doesn't have any additional antennas except for a third. It's underneath the battery tray. Other than that, this jet's, there's not a whole lot to it that's different than most other F-14s out there, except for the spoiler panels, which are going to be incredible for air braking and for creating friction on the ground because both the Viper wheels and the stock wheels use ball bearings. I could have taken that out, but I do want it to roll smoothly, so it reduces the amount of lift required to, or not lift, but thrust required to get the model up into the air on takeoff rolls. So let's go through and explain how you guys need to set this up. I'm gonna find a way to record my screen from my iX20 and set it up as an overlay so you can see what I'm doing in real time rather than having you look at the screen itself while I'm holding it, because really that's just not productive and you need to be able to see the model as I'm working on it. So as I'm talking, I'll sync up the movements of the radio screen recorder to the jet as you see what it's capable of doing. Let's put this little shoulder panel down. It looks kind of ugly, doesn't it? There we go. I don't have it screwed in right now, so that's about as good as it's going to look for the time being. So for the wings extended, I did opt to keep the pseudo ailerons in place. This I felt was critical to getting a proper roll rate. These stabs are massive, but they don't have a whole lot of effect on the roll axis. With the Elevon configuration, I do have to increase the amount of roll gain that I'm getting on AS3X so that the plane doesn't get bopped around too much in turbulence, because these stabs are really effective in pitch, not terribly effective in roll. Those tiny little ailerons on the outboard edges of the wing really do a lot of to make this plane roll. It forces those wings to move. Otherwise, they're just giant boards that the stabs have to fight through. So it's not 100% scale, but as you saw in my video recently on the F-14, I will choose a better flying system over something that's 100% scale, because if this was 100% scale, those spoiler panels would pop up and they would be an option to use on the wing. but they're not. So you got to work with what you got. Either you get 100% scale, which you're not going to get because it's missing features, or you get something that flies better. And to me, this flies better. However, they don't have any effect when the flaps are out in takeoff or in landing config. And they don't have any effect when the wheels, or sorry, the wings are swept back. See? So when the wings are swept, they have no effect whatsoever. And when the flaps are out, they also, again, have no effect whatsoever. Let's go ahead and quickly go through the flap system setup so you guys can see what I'm using. Take a seat in my chair. I'm using 150% rates. This is important because the rates that I'm going to give you, I'm going to translate for you. For those of you using 150% rates, I will tell you the first number. And then for those of you using 100% rates, I will tell you the second number. So for position 0 on the flap system, the flap and elevator obviously are going to be 0. That's going to be for 100% and for 150% users. Takeoff flaps.
Flaps 50.
That is in 150% rates, a rate of 34% flap, and the compensation required to get it to not nose down on you, or if it does nose down, it's going to be very light and gentle, is 12%. Translate it to 100% values, you're looking at a flap percentage of 51% and an elevator compensation of 18%. For landing flaps,
full flaps,
you are looking at 75% for 150% users and 20% elevator, which is translated to 112%. So if you can't hit that, if you don't want to go that far on the flaps, or if you don't want to give them that much travel, 100% is fine. And for the elevator compensation, you would need 30%. But if you're only moving to 100% on the flat travel, then you probably only need about 25 to 28% elevator compensation. So keep that in mind as you work with the setup and translate it over to you and your 100% rate setup versus what I fly, which is 150. I prefer 150. I get much more travel and I get a lot more precision. So that's my personal viewpoint on it. Let's go through the mixes. I'll show you guys what everything does. We'll start with the first mix, which is going to be throttle to auxiliary 7. Auxiliary 7 being my variable gain channel. So let's go ahead and thrust up real quick so it activates.
Throttle cut. Throttle open.
Okay.
Gear down.
We're going to set up I'm going to demonstrate it with the gear out first because there's two different ways to do this that I've got it set up. I've got a gear out and I've got a gear up version, but I need to disable a mix first. So let me go ahead and do that. Just set this to off and then we'll go back to the mix. Right now I've got a curved expo mix. All right, so my curved expo mix is going to control the gain channel. Gain channel is AX7. We are looking at 0.1 being 0%, 0.2 being 52%. So it's throttle cut and put it in landing config. At 52%, it has a ton of effect. All right, so at position 0, we have 0% on the stabilization. That is going to come into effect later when I show you the receiver values and go over this. Actually, I'll show it to you right now. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. So we go to forward programming and I will pull up the gyro settings, AS3X settings, and the AS3X gains. I'm working with a roll gain of 80%, a pitch gain of 80%, and a yaw gain of 70%. Because I'm on variable gains, and because my slider that's controlling this is in its default state, which is 0, that makes the gyro gains currently 40, 40, and 35. As I throttle up, that goes from 40, 40, and 35 to a maximum value of 60, 60, and 52. And then at full effect, it's 22, 22, and 20. I'll show you what that looks like as I demonstrate this mix. So throttle to AX7 with the gear out at landing thrust, which is about where I want to be. Looking at the picture-in-picture on the screen here, you'll see this is the effect that the stabs have in roll.
2 minutes.
Okay, and up and down, they have a bit of an effect, but not as much as they do in roll. And the rudders have an effect but not a huge effect. I'm actually going to have to probably replace one of the rudder servos because the one on the right doesn't seem like it has a lot of sensitivity like it should. It's kind of moving more than it should be. I think the air pressure would help keep it in place, but we'll have to see. So as you go all the way up to half throttle, this is what it looks like with the gear out. Has an effect, but not as much. Make sure I'm not going to drop this plane on the floor by accidentally letting it slip off. And then at full throttle, it has almost no effect at all. This is by design. At full throttle, I want to not have the plane oscillate or do anything weird or overcompensate. At landing thrust, I will put a picture-in-picture in here showing you what happens when you do have the stabilators correcting for roll as well as pitch. There was a point on one of my first landings that I did where in the plane with full span flaps deployed, you're more susceptible to a wingtip stall because you're generating lift equally across the entire surface of the wing. When the airflow kind of like just decides it's going to give up and separate from the wing, where that tends to happen is the wing tip on these foam models because of how aggressive these wings bite into the air just based on how thick they are. And what that causes is the plane to immediately drop. So I was like this and it rolled over and you could see the stabs fight it and it actually leveled itself out. I didn't even level it. It did it all by itself. So it was able to fight that with the roll correction system that I've put into it with the simulated flight control computer that I'm using. Now let's get the gear up.
Wing normal.
And I'll show you what this looks like with the gear up. It has much less of an effect. See how it's barely doing anything on low throttle? Okay. On half throttle, it still similarly has a little bit of an effect, but not much. And then at full throttle, whoops, just about dropped the plane. On full throttle, it has basically no effect at all. It's barely moving. This is so I don't get any high-speed oscillations from the plane, whether or not it's correcting for turbulence or just the oscillations that come from moving too quickly. The plane will, the gyroscope in the Spektrum receiver, or any gyroscope really, if it's set too high, the faster you go, the more the wings are going to rock. So you do need to tune that. And there is no tuning that I've ever seen that is perfect across the flight envelope. The faster you go with stock set values, eventually you will hit a point where the plane starts oscillating left and right, or up and down, or side to side. It's just best to have, in my opinion, dynamic gains, and that's what this flight control computer mix does. So let's demonstrate the aileron movement. Those of you who've set up your plane before, you might find the concept of setting up differential stabilators to be confusing and weird. How do you know that they're moving the correct direction? It's simple if you remember which directions the ailerons on a wing are supposed to move. So when you go to roll left, the right wing control surfaces should move down and the left wing control surfaces should move up. Similar to the stabilators, the trailing edge should move down on the right and up on the left when you're going to roll left. When you're going to roll right, it's the opposite. The left one should move down, the right one should move up. Up, down, left, right. That's the easiest way to remember it. Trailing edge. The ailerons are a very simple setup. They are set aileron to AX3 and another mix for aileron to AX4 with a rate of -75 and -75. And those are controlled by my flight modes. I've got several flight modes in here. The first two flight modes are for the wings extended. The first flight mode is wheels out, wings extended. The second flight mode is wheels up, wings extended. And the third flight mode is wings swept, wheels up. So the way I've got this set up right now, it's a combo switch for flight modes 1 and 2. They have to be active for this to work, and you have to have the flaps up for this to work. If I have the flaps out, the ailerons immediately center themselves and droop with the flaps. When you let them go, when you put the flaps up, the ailerons move again. When you pull the wings back, the ailerons center themselves immediately. When you pull the wings out, the ailerons move again. You don't want the ailerons moving when the wings are swept. What ends up happening is you get turbulent airflow moving over the stabilators, and that can cause them to, I wouldn't say blank out, but it introduces unstable air over them, and then it causes it to fly really weird. Unless that's your thing, I say don't do it. The full-scale model doesn't even have ailerons anyway. It just has full spoileron panels that pop up whenever the plane goes to roll. Like when you want to roll left, this whole panel will pop up. When you want to roll right, that panel pops up to help push the wing down and get it out of the way. I do like having the ailerons out when the wings are swept out and the flaps aren't out. The reasoning being is that these are giant wings. This is as wide as my turbo timber, and at 1.5 meters of wingspan, these stabilators are too close together in the center part of the plane to really have enough effect. They don't have enough mechanical advantage to fight over the force that those wings generate, to overpower the lift that they're generating. Which is why if you see my initial flight video and you see me testing the full span flaps, the plane does barrel rolls when the ailerons aren't enabled. But when the ailerons are enabled, you get a full axial roll because it forces the wings to disperse their lift and just roll rather than try to maintain lift through the entire roll. It just looks better to me too. Okay, next sweat up here. We'll go ahead and demonstrate the rudder to AX2. AX2 is the nose wheel. This has no effect. It has no effect when the wheel is up. If the wheels are up, the nose wheel can't move. In a stock Freewing jet, or any jet really these days that comes in bind and fly or plug and play, when you set this up, the nose wheel moves with the rudders. That's what this avoids. Basically, it's just rudder to AX2, AX2 being the nose wheel. When I pull the gear out, you get a better look at what it's doing. Okay. You can see when I go to full right rudder and then pull the gear switch back, it centers itself automatically. So it doesn't waste any servo power rotating a gear that it can't rotate because it has no effect when the gear are up. So there's no reason for it to even be enabled. I have enough channels to do it. I chose to do that. Okay. Let's move on to the trimmable nose wheel part. That's really simple. It's right trim to auxiliary 2, a rate of -100 to -100. That causes the nose wheel to move left when you push down.
Steering -17.
And it makes the nose wheel move right when you push up. That is what -100 and -100 does. And the switch is set to on so that right trim, the switch right here, always controls the nose wheel trim. Flap to flap is switch D2. Flap to flap meaning the flap system controls the flap servo. So flap system to flap servo is what this is saying. And a rate of -100 to -100 forces the flaps to move up.
Full flaps.
Let's go ahead and get the gear up so I'll show you what it looks like. Forces the flaps to move up whenever the wings are swept back so that you cannot jam the wings together into the fuselage.
Wing sweep.
And now the ailerons also move up as well because they're being controlled by the flap system. Make sure that because I have a 6-second timer on the flaps, make sure that if you have a timer on them, that you pull the flaps up completely before disabling the mix or enabling the wing sweep. Otherwise, when I go to throw the switch back up, the flaps are immediately going to drop right back down. So I have to push the flaps all the way up, wait for the elevators to stop compensating, then pull the wings back out. Otherwise, they would have just dropped right into it and they would have damaged the plane or the servos or anything else. Pretty simple setup on that. You just have to know what it is that it's doing. Switch D2 to AX5 is a mix that just controls my, my wing sweep. AX5 is my wing sweep. It's just a value of 100 on flight mode 2. On flight mode 3, it's 100 on AX5. It just kind of gives me fine-tuned control over when it moves and when it doesn't.
Wing normal.
Pretty simple. The switch that I had to disable earlier was switch H, controlling the gear channel. This needs to be turned back on. This prevents me from dropping the wheels. You'll notice the wheels automatically come back up. This prevents me from lifting the wheels up on the ground if throttle cut is enabled.
Throttle open. Gear down.
If throttle cut is disabled, I can lift the gear whenever I feel like it, but if my gear or my throttle cut is enabled, I can't pull the gear up. They'll actually never move.
Wing normal.
See?
Wing normal. Ear down.
This is done by mixing switch H to the gear channel, a rate of 0 for the H, it doesn't matter, rate of negative 100 for gear, whatever really makes it go to 150%, and then the offset to 100%, so it forces it to stay at 100 when I flip that switch up, so it doesn't go to negative 100 and cause the gear to come back up. Okay, next step here is to show off the Aileron full span mix to get that full span flaperon, whatever you want to call it, full span flap setup. This is flap to AX3, flap to AX4. AX3 is negative 100, AX4 is 100. It's a combo switch on flight modes 1 and 2. Again, 1 being wheels out, wings out, and 2 being wheels up, wings out. It has effect when the wheels or when the wings are retracted, it can't do anything. On switch 0, 1, and 2 for D, it has to be and. Otherwise, what ends up happening is when you go to retract the flaps, the aileron would pop all the way back up instantly. So here's what it looks like. Get down so you can see it. See how it pops all the way back up? That could cause some disturbances in the airflow on the wing. It's not something you really want. So it's best to just have it move in concert with the flaps, and that's what this mix does. Okay, C to flap, C to AX3, and C to AX4. We'll start with C to flap, and I'll show you one of the other ones because they're both the same, just one of them's inverted. C, switch C, controls the flap, and that causes the flaps to move up. Before this can even work, I have to show you how it works. I had to undo the flap on both wings, so I had to unscrew it, take this out, and recenter this so that the flap was matching the aileron position, aileron horn position on the servo arm, so that they're both pointing straight down, or as straight down as they're going to get. And that way, when I go to enable the spoilers, the panels both go up at the same rate. They're at the same position. So that has to be done first. You actually have to pull out the servo and reposition the horn to make it work. Otherwise, it won't work because it'll just bind. Okay, to do this, it is a value, or sorry, you have to mix the C switch to the flap channel for the flap servo. So C switch to the flap servo, a rate of 0 and 100%. On mine, it's a combo switch. It can only be done on flight mode 1 with the wheels out and the wings extended. And switch C has to be in position 2. So I get a warning before I do this.
Spoilers armed.
Okay, so I know that I'm about to screw something up or enable them if I go all the way down.
Spoilers.
Which is what happens.
Wing normal.
That causes that. That's really cool. I love it. I was originally going to set this up. I had to pick between having the entire spoiler panel move up. Like, so when I went to go roll, like spoilers. This one would move up as like they would look like this, basically. So it would get that full spoiler panel effect that Chris at RC Geek was going for, whereas his only makes the aileron move up. Mine would make the entire wing move like the real thing, except, you know, the spoiler panels themselves aren't moving. But because I don't have enough channels, I picked the Trimmable Nosewheel. I felt it was more useful. And honestly, I preferred the full equal lift adjustment on both sides. I could have actually made it full span ailerons too, but it already has a pretty ridiculous roll rate with the ailerons mixed into the stabilators, so it doesn't really need that. If I do go to a 12-channel setup in the future, I can make the flaperon, or sorry, the flap and the aileron pop up at the same time, and then the other one would stay put, and I could test that and see if it's worth it. All right, so to make the ailerons pop up, it's switch C, controlling auxiliary 3 and auxiliary 4. The only difference is auxiliary 3 on the right needs negative 59% on the right value, and the one on the left aileron needs 59%. And that's the same setup as earlier, flight mode 1 and switch C, controlling it. Pretty easy setup overall. It really makes this model shine, I feel. And to me, it's awesome. I hope that pretty much covers everything for you guys.
Safe.
You can see, again,
AS3X.
this is what I'm going to be flying this model on from now on. I want that spoiler effect. I put about an hour and a half worth of work into it to get it to work the way I wanted it to, and I think it's going to just turn out amazingly well. Now I got to go cut this together and get you all picture in picture and demonstrate some of the features of this as it's flying. Hope you guys enjoy. Again, this is John at SynRC signing out. Cheers, guys. Have a good one.